Welcome back to The Move, where I've been through the book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Koo, and in today's episode, we're talking about the one time in the Bible that God kills a man because he masturbated. If you're wondering, what are we looking at? We're looking at Genesis chapter 38, verses 1 through 11. My guest is Pastor Harold. And by the way, this episode is sponsored by Dwell Bible App. Stick around to the end of the episode to figure out how you can get an actual free membership to Dwell. That being said, I feel like there's context that is important. I used to run a kind of question and answer Bible show on YouTube, like an Ask Me Anything kind of a show. And one of the questions that would invariably come up is the question about masturbation. And the reality is, the church that I went to, I want to say never talked about masturbation, which is maybe properly right, because maybe that's not the context you want to talk about that. That being said, though, I did some of the Google searches, like what does the Bible say about masturbation or Bible text on masturbation? And this was a story that always came up. This guy called Onan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and basically the whole story was used to communicate that if you masturbate, you will die. And it's just kind of a bizarre conclusion to come, because I'm sure there's been at least one person in the history of the world who has not died because of that. And so it's a weird conclusion to make. And so I don't know. I want to talk about this because I think it's something that does exist out there in culture. And I want to believe that by the end of this episode, we'll get to the concluding point that this chapter has nothing to do with masturbation. I think that it's a fair assessment. Is that okay, Pastor Harold? Can you help me through this?
Yes, because I can resonate with your confession. I have been, this text has been taught to me that way in more than once. I remember growing up listening to El Pecado de Onanismo, the sin of onanism.
When you say it in another language, it sounds very serious. It sounds very
Pecado
heavy.
de Onanismo.
Oh my goodness.
It was very ominous, onanismo, ominous, and it was just like, what? I would have read the story that way. And I might have even taught it in this way, unfortunately.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
To some poor youth group out there as a pastor. I don't know, please forgive me if I ever taught you this, because I was wrong.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's not what it is about.
No. If you listen, and I think that's one of the things that we might sometimes forget is that we sometimes read the Bible and we just take for granted what it said instead of like actually reading what the text says and realizing that, oh, wait, that's not what the text says. The text says something completely different. But we don't have to go into those weeds necessarily today. Let's go into this specific weed today. So this story is not about masturbation. This is not a text that your youth pastor or anybody should be using to tell you boys and girls don't masturbate. This is not the text to use. There's others out there, I'm sure. We're not going to talk about those today. We're going to talk about this story.
Okay.
And it's an interesting story because it's sort of following the narrative it's sort of like a Hinge passage, right? So Joseph has been sold into slavery, and he's kind of put into the background for a second because you don't know what's going to happen with this kid.
Right. You don't know if he lives. Does he die? Is it a good story? Is it bad? All you know, he's sold into slavery. Then all of a sudden the camera just pans really, really, really quickly. And now we're focused on the story of Judah.
Exactly. And oddly enough, the last time you and I saw Judah, he was the one with the idea of selling his brother into slavery. Oh. He was the one who said, why kill him? Let's make a profit out this kid. Okay. And let's just sell him to slavery. Like, yeah. And now he's going to have these three sons, right? Onan, and Shelah. And the first one, is going to marry this girl named Tamar. And apparently this kid is so wicked. This guy is so wicked. He's so evil that God is going to kill him. Literally, that's what the text said. He is so evil that God kills him. This is the first time in the entirety of the Bible where you were going to find that phrase, so evil that God killed him. Okay.
Okay.
Which that already is one of those like, whoa parts of the story. Okay. Mm-hmm. He was so evil that God killed him. I can't imagine how bad this guy was. But then this is where the story takes a really odd twist, right? So there's this thing called Levirate marriage in the Old Testament and in patriarchal times, and is later repeated in the Pentateuch and Deuteronomy, where if you marry, right, and you die, not because you're wicked, Justin, but just because you die.
Just
and
happened.
You did not leave, it just happened, and you did not leave any children for your wife. Your brother has to step in and father a child for you, like in your name. That's the custom. And the reason for that is basically tied to inheritance, so that the inheritance that was supposed to be received stays within the family. It's supposed to, it's tied to preserving the name of in your case, the Justin name, right? It's still preserved. It's still kept. Things stay within the family, right? And also to provide protection for the widow, right? So here, Judah tells his second son, Onan, yo, do the thing. And Onan does the thing, but he is not fulfilling his duty. He is and the text sort of like implies that this is repeated. So what he is doing is what technically is called as coitus interruptus. It's a very fancy name to say coitus interruptus.
Now, let's be real. You didn't come up with that term. That was something that you read once.
No. I read once in a book. Yes. I read once in a book. It said coitus interruptus, and it's a fun word and a nice clean way of saying what the Bible also very tastefully says he spilled on the ground. Right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're all adults here, so you can figure out what he was doing. And God kills him for that. So nowhere in the text is there an implication of first that coitus interruptus is a sin, and second that Onan was masturbating. He was not masturbating at all. So then the story goes that Judah has a third son, and he's supposed to fulfill this Levirate duty. And Judah's like, yeah, no, because you're bad luck. Like he actually looks at Tamar, right?
And blames her.
Says, nah, it's her fault.
Yes, clearly
it's not.
If anyone's at fault, it's the woman. It's not the two men that are so wicked that God's
clearly,
Clearly,
it's the woman. It is not the two evil, wicked sons that I've had. Clearly, it's that woman. She's the one that's bad luck. So I am not sending my boy to her because he's going to die, right? And that's where the story takes on a second term that you'll see in tomorrow's episode that I'm not going to get into too much because, that's the fascinating part of the story. So this is where now if you start looking at what is going on in the story is really about Onan not in the act that he is doing per se, but in what he is doing through that act. Right? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it makes sense because when I think about other passages in the Bible where it talks about people being really, really wicked and then God sending a judgment on those people, I think of like the flood.
Yeah.
And we've had those conversations on, well, what's exactly
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Here? Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not as though that God is acting hastily, as though he's just like, oh, you messed up once, now you're off with your head. But what we're seeing is that God is observing a repeated pattern, one that's going kind of against the pleas and the heeds of God, trying to get them to repent. We see that. And more importantly than that, it's not just though that wickedness in and of itself per se is the reason, but it's almost as though that these judgments are defensive acts against the plan of salvation, in that when wickedness happens so freely, what we're seeing, at least in these stories, is that what's at risk is the lineage, is the progeny, is the idea that a savior could possibly come through this line. And the reason why that God must act definitively is to defend the lineage. And so if we're seeing right here is that Judah now is carrying this promise, and yet what we're seeing is an interruption of the line that which this Messiah figure could come through, it makes sense that why God is, I'm going to use air quotes here for those who are listening, is overreacting. God's not overreacting. God is literally acting in defense of the promise which Judah is carrying. And what we're seeing is that his sons really seemingly have no interest in being a part of this redemptive story.
Right. I think that another thing to keep here in perspective, I love what you're saying, because that is exactly what is going on. We sometimes read, we have the tendency of reading the Old Testament and putting God in a box of like this petty, petulant God who at the slightest offense, is just zapping people left and right. And it seems here that at least in this case, just focusing on this case, this man was evil. At least was. How evil was he? And this is, sometimes we get into these conversations of like, well, I want to know how evil he was, And it's almost like a distrust of God's judgment. Like,
Wow.
you know, I want to know how evil he was. What did he do that was so evil? Like, did he kill babies? Like, how evil was he so that God killed him? Well, I don't know. What the Bible says is the man was evil.
Hmm.
And I'm going to trust that when God is saying something and is describing something, as much as it makes me uncomfortable, the judge of all the world and of all the universe understands that maybe this man was beyond the pale of redemption, which is such a bizarre thing to think of, right? But
Mhm.
that's what was happening. And his little brother Onan, yeah, he's not too far off.
Hmm.
And that's the other perspective here to keep in mind, I think, is a perspective of Tamar.
Right.
Because she's the one who's actually getting gypped. she's getting what's the word here?
She's certainly getting taken
Estafada.
advantage of. She's getting messed over.
That's the word, estafada. Yeah.
Estafada?
I
What
got
is that word?
confused. Estafar is when you estafar. I've been duped. I've been swindled. I've been ripped off.
Ripped
This
off.
is una
Got it.
estafa. Yeah. So Tamar, sorry, I just get confused.
No problem.
So Tamar is the one who's getting ripped off here, right? And here's the reason how she's getting because first of all, there's the let's see if we can put it in as I think about it. There's this duty that she has to perform in order to produce progeny, right? The coitus, right? And we'll just, it's a very simple thing. In order for a man to have coitus, he needs to be aroused, right? It's impossible for a man to have coitus, intercourse, when he's not aroused. If you're going to have intercourse, you need to be aroused. A woman doesn't necessarily have to be aroused to have intercourse. You go what I'm following?
Yeah.
Yeah. So here is Tamar having to go through this. I'm pretty sure there's a high probability that she's not necessarily stoked about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So she's not aroused, but she's going through it. Onan needs to be aroused to go through it. And the text is implying that he's repeatedly doing this. In other words, Mr. Onan is taking advantage of a situation that they've both been thrust into, right? And he's taking advantage of a situation by repeatedly doing this to his sister-in-law. And instead of giving her what she needs, what she is required to get, he is getting only pleasure and not duty. Like he's literally taking advantage of her repeatedly. That's what's implied in the text. Not only that, by not producing an offspring for her, what is happening is that Onan is actually strategizing, and he is now pretending to get the inheritance that belongs to his older brother. So there's an inheritance that's going to be reparted, that's going to be portioned up. His brother should get that inheritance, but since he is dead, who's going to get that inheritance?
The next oldest
Onan.
brother, which is him.
Unless, of course, there's a child that is fathered by Onan that gets the inheritance that belongs to her. So Onan is not just taking advantage of her sexually, because that's what he's doing. He is also taking advantage of the fact that he is stopping and erasing his brother's name according to the custom and the law that states it, that she is supposed to get this, so that he can take advantage of that and he can keep the inheritance that belongs to his brother. So this is why this is wickedness. And this is where God shows up and he says, no, we're not doing this. You stop. Like, you are not taking advantage of your sister-in-law this way. Like, whatever customs, weird customs that we, from the 21st century, again, because that's something that we also need to keep in mind, is that from the year 2022, we look back with our Christian background and our Christian ethics, and obviously this is crazy, right? This is not something that we would necessarily do. And Deuteronomy actually prescribes that this is something that can be done, but it's not an obligation. That's the other part. It's like, this is not an obligation. There's kind of like a shaming ceremony that shows up in Deuteronomy 25, where we have to be embarrassed in public if you're the brother-in-law that doesn't want to fulfill this duty, but you're not obligated to do it. So here Onan is massively taking advantage of Tamar, and that's wrong. And God shows up and intervenes in her favor once again. And if you follow the entire line of the story, which I'm not going to get into because I can't, that is actually what she tries to get at the end, that she is being taken advantage of by Onan and by Judah, and she is doing something that actually reinstates what she is due. And so much so, I think, that Matthew includes that specific name in the genealogy of Jesus. There's 4 women in the genealogy. One of them is Tamar. It's like, and Judah by Tamar, right? So, like, the story is not about masturbation. Clearly, it is not about masturbation. If you read the text, it's not telling you boys and girls don't masturbate because God's going to get angry at you. That story is not telling you that. That story is talking about selfishness. It's talking about you taking advantage of people. It's you being so wicked that you don't want to, like, you literally don't want to help your brother out, your brother that died. You know, you just want to, like, erase him.
I think one of the kind of reoccurring themes that we're seeing over and over as well is that God is on the side of those who are rejected, that those who are taken advantage of, that those who are forgotten, maybe oftentimes in the narrative. Like it's interesting that this is one of the few times that the point of view of the story kind of shifts to Tamar. Like we'll see it in tomorrow's episode, but it really does show that God is actually on the side of those who are maligned. And those who are in power, like there's a duty for those who are in power to be able to look after those who are vulnerable. Yep. And I love that this is what's highlighted here, is that Tamar is not faulted in any way, shape, or form. Actually, what later on the passage actually is described that what she does, we'll get to it in tomorrow's episode, is actually defined as righteousness, that she's honored in the lineage of Jesus because of how God is looking after her. So I think that there's a lot here that's coming together. Like you said, I think you said it really well, Pastor, that this is one of those things that culturally we're like, what in the world? This makes no sense. Yeah. But what we do see is a God who cares about those who really have no one else to take care of them.
Exactly. And I think that that's, once again, you know, a lot of times we look at these stories in especially in Genesis, which we've said a million times and we'll say it 1,000,001. Descriptive, not prescriptive. Okay. The Bible is describing what's going on. It's not prescribing you to go do all these things. All right. So let's be very clear. And in this weird story, once again, the gospel is showing up in the fact that God is, like, standing up for those who need to be stood up for. He is vindicating the victim, right? He is actually preserving the lineage. Oddly, like, this is the part that's like Judah is the one who's going to carry the line of the Messiah, right? And God is showing up in the story saying the promise of progeny. And his faithfulness once again is coming through, in spite of the human elements that carry out that promise. Like, this is the part where sometimes we look at our ancestors, our spiritual ancestors, we're like, oh, how dare they? And
rightfully so.
Yeah, sure. How dare they? Have you looked at yourself in the Bible is a mirror.
There you go.
Bible's a mirror. And a lot of times we look at it as only as just a storybook where it points to other people, but the Bible's a mirror. So yeah, maybe you're not sleeping with your sister-in-law. Hopefully you're not. But what's the level of selfishness that you're dealing with that is capable of actually you gypping somebody out of something that is legitimately theirs? You know, like, that's a whole construct right there of justice and of God's righteousness, and him showing up and saying, no, we're not doing this anymore. We're putting an end to it right now. And ultimately that is what the gospel is the day that he will come and say, we're not doing this injustice anymore. We're done. We've clearly proven the point here, folks. And that's the beauty of the gospel, I think, in this story.
So at the beginning of the episode, I promised that there would be a giveaway for a membership to Dwell Bible app. Pastor Harold, you have been a user of Dwell Bible app, so much to the extent that when I told you that they were sponsoring this episode and that you yourself could be gifted a free membership, you're like, I don't need it because I already got the lifetime subscription to Dwell, so let's just give it away to someone else instead. Yes. So I would love to know, first, how did you hear about Dwell and why is it a Bible app that you really value?
I heard about Dwell. I believe that the culprit of Dwell is none other than Kessie Bennett.
That would make sense.
I believe that she's the culprit of Dwell. Or
she has claimed that she gives away lifetime memberships as like her favorite gift to give away. So maybe you were a victim of her generosity.
No, I did. I have not been a benefactor of her generosity at all. It was either Kezib Bennett or our friend Eddie Cornejo. It was one of those two folks that got me into Dwell.
Very cool.
And I got it when they only had like 4 voices. Now there's like 15 voices, and there's like all these, like you can play with the settings, and you can have like guitar music and piano music, and typically I don't like any background noise.
Same.
Typically I have Felix, the man from Africa. I just like his accent a lot. So
I think that's one of the coolest parts about this app. And you're saying they only had 4, so you picked the one maybe non-Western sounding accent. But now there's like, I don't know how many, 15, 20 different readers of different versions of the Bible. I think it's super cool that you can actually, I don't know. I like listening to the Bible with a non-American accent because it just sounds more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, even, that's odd that you mentioned that, because I think that's true, because even my Siri, I have her with
the accent.
I have her with an Indian accent.
Oh, there you go.
So Dwell, great app. I love it. I think it's one of the best apps out there. If you're walking and you're listening to it, or if for some reason you can't be reading because it's dark and your kids are sleeping in your room and you just want something to read, you can put your headphones on and have the Bible read to you. It's a great plug. It is a great sponsor to have. So congratulations on the move.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very excited. One of the features that I'm actually looking forward to testing now that Maddie has officially turned 1 year old, we're looking for different ways to kind of solve the whole changing sleep patterns. I mean, like late last night, literally, because we got off a plane from Hawaii to come back to California to celebrate birthday time with our family.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. He has woken up like 5 times in just one night, and it's been very, very stressful with the time change and everything like that. So I'm waking up at the equivalent of 4 a.m. to start the day after having 5 wake up sessions in the middle of the night. So one of the features actually is like a collection of verses around different themes, and one of the themes is around sleep. Several different Bible verses around sleep, and kind of just like lull you into this peaceful state, knowing that everything's going to be all right. It's really cool. Kezib was telling me that one of the ways that she uses the app is for her kids, and they listen to Bible stories as they're putting their kids to bed. I'm like, putting 2 together. That's just genius. I need to do that with Maddie. So that's actually one of the things I'm going to be attempting in the next couple of weeks.
I'm gonna try that too with my daughter. It will not be Genesis 38. Definitely
please
not.
Don't listen to Genesis 38 with the kids.
That is not a story to listen to.
This might be a hot take, but I was actually, after we recorded our episode together with Kezib, she was saying how with her children, she actually doesn't like letting them watch like Bible videos or Bible movies, because so frequently they get the narrative wrong. Yeah, and even the way that the narrative emerges is often done with something that's just not like respecting the text. So actually, I'll spoil a future. Actually, I think it's one of our next episodes, or one of the recent episodes with her. I was talking about how when I hear the story of Joseph tattling on his brothers, I'm like, Punk had it coming, because all they were doing was trying to go swimming while they were working, and it was hot. And so why'd you have to snitch on them, Joseph? And then so like I think of the story from that perspective, and it's like, well, maybe that's not what they were doing. They were up to a whole bunch of really evil, wicked things. And so accountability was maybe justified in that moment. And so all that comes because of that one movie that I watched when I was a kid, and the movies don't tell it well. So the conclusion of all that was a very long night. The conclusion was maybe there's wisdom in limiting biblical movies to children and instead letting them listening to the actual scripture.
I believe that there is a lot of wisdom to that. So I'm gonna thank you for pointing that out, because I had not. I'll in honesty also, I haven't used Dwell in a while.
Oh, you got to get back on it, huh?
Yeah, not because I don't like it or anything. I've been doing something else. I've been reading the text on my own, et cetera, et cetera. So that sleep pattern, I'm gonna test it out, because that sounds fun.
Well, maybe after a couple of weeks, you and I have tested it in the field, and we'll see, does it make a difference for the children or not?
I will. Yeah, I don't know. I'll test it out. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-month-old, so we'll see how that pattern pans out.
Very cool. Very cool. So real quick, let me tell people how to get a 30% off discount off their Dwell app. So
that's nice.
all you got to go is go to dwellapp.io/themove. That's dwellapp.io/themove. And you get 30% off the lifetime subscription. To
Anybody
the app,
that goes? Anybody that goes?
Anybody who goes.
What if 100 people go?
Off. If 100 people go, then great. They'll probably want to sponsor the next season of The Move as well. So hey, this is actually one of those things where it's like, guys, let's be real. I know that you guys, money is tight. I get it. But if you're in the market for a Bible app already, I'm not trying to pressure you to spend money that you don't have. But if you were already planning on it, use the code because it actually does support the show and it does.
What's the code again? What's the code?
dwellapp.io/themove. But we got good news.
Okay.
If you can't afford it, we want to make sure that you can still get it. And since Pastor Harold has already been a lifetime subscriber to Dwell app, we get to give away his membership. And so I'm really looking to you, Pastor Harold. How can we get people to respond? And then you can select who you want to give the membership away to.
Oh, man, that's a great
a lot of pressure.
question. Yeah, because I have not thought of this, Justin. You should have let me know. Like I had to come up with some creative way to get people.
How about this? In the comments of the YouTube section, if you will describe your favorite Bible story only using emojis, no words, only emojis. And
That's
Pastor
beautiful.
Harold will comb through the comments, and whoever tells the best Bible story using emojis only will be gifted
win the app. All right.
The app subscription.
Sweet.
Sound good?
That's perfect. I love it. Let's do that.
All right. If you are not willing to play our game, then that's fine. I get it. You just don't enjoy fun. You can go and buy the app, dwellapp.io/
at 30% discount.
And get 30% off. But for everyone else, there's a little contest we're running. Give us your Bible story and
you get a
emojis
free
in the
lifetime.
comments below.
Free lifetime?
Check it out.
Wow. That's good.